This is Sarah Jones on the Politicus Pod for Politicus USA's The Daily. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen so you don't miss any episodes. Today we're talking about MAGA Republicans and the threat they pose to U.S. national security and global freedom. Many Republicans, MAGA Republicans specifically, have positioned themselves as weak and almost impotent on the fundamental issue of basic freedom, even while the United States is effectively at war. The United States is effectively at war, except it's a different kind of war so far, one in which we don't have troops on the ground. It's an indirect conflict. We, along with our closest allies, are in a fight against rising global fascism, as represented most horrifically right now by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But the threat is even bigger than Ukraine, and that's why we and our closest allies are pouring so many resources into helping Ukraine defend itself. Putin isn't going to stop at Ukraine. He has an avaricious, predatory outlook and is driven by revenge against countries he feels have weakened and wronged Russia. MAGA Republicans continue to attack President Biden and even call for his impeachment as he takes brave steps to help Ukraine win this bloody, tragic, and genocidal war that Russia is waging on them in their home country. So it's kind of past time to wonder if this is a feature and not a bug, given the connections and the money flowing from Russia to MAGA Republicans, their leader, and even Republican Senate funds and the NRA. There's a pattern that is simply too blatant to ignore, but at the same time, there isn't evidence that someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene or even Speaker Kevin McCarthy is working for Putin or even Russian oligarchs. So we need to be very careful about that, because what we have is that they both look, for some reason, like they're doing their best to assist Putin, and I would say that's much more true for Marjorie Taylor Greene. But Kevin McCarthy is a very weak leader, and he tends to, so far, he's letting the MAGA Republicans set the agenda, and he seems to be bending to them, to their will, which he had to do even to get the gavel. Their latest efforts being to give Tucker Carlson, himself an ongoing mouthpiece for Russia's propaganda, access to footage from the January 6th terrorist attack, which Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer pointed out puts everyone in that building at risk because it shows, for example, where all of the security cameras are. He said the Senate strongly objects to the release of this sensitive security footage to Tucker Carlson and Fox News. The Speaker, nor any elected official, does not have the right to jeopardize the safety of senators, nor Senate and Capitol staff for their own political purposes. How sad is that? This is where we are in this country. Kevin McCarthy is the Speaker of the House, and this is what he decided was okay to do. And I think we all know what would have happened if there were even an equivalent to Fox on the left in broadcast news, but there isn't. Many people try to equate MSNBC to Fox News, but that's simply, that's about ideology, which even MSNBC is pretty light on their leanings towards liberalism. They have a lot of Republicans actually hosting shows, large segments of shows in the morning. And but it's not about ideology. What happens is, the difference is that Fox News is actively pushing propaganda for the Republican Party, which we actually knew years ago when they read off a fax that was sent to them, and they read it off verbatim. I think it was sent from the White House, but now they've been busted again in these texts that came out that showed that they knew that Trump lost the election, and that there were, they thought these election claims that Trump and his band of clowns have been making, they knew those to be absurd and false. So the state of play that we find ourselves in right now has also shifted a little bit, and that makes everything a little bit more precarious, and it makes it even more important that we somehow get Republicans on board to act as a unified coalition on this one issue. Globally, every weak spot in the fabric of democracy is strained as encroaching authoritarianism keeps pushing at the vulnerable spots. And Russia pulled out of the START treaty on Wednesday, the last arms control treaty between the United States and Russia. And together, the two countries possess roughly 90% of the world's nuclear weapons, with a stockpile of over 8,000 between them. So that's obviously a big change and very troubling. Foreign policy reporter Laura Rosen wrote on her diplomatic Substack, Putin holds arms treaty hostage to war on Ukraine, and she notes world powers that previously compartmentalized arms control from their other disagreements now no longer appear willing to do so, putting solutions to limit the threat of nuclear proliferation in jeopardy on Iran and globally. It's terrible, one European official who works on arms control said about the end of the Western Russian cooperation on curbing Iran's nuclear program. The work of 20 years somehow lost. That's on Laura Rosen's Substack. Pretty alarming. Alarming enough that anyone with an ounce of care for the basic concept of freedom should be grabbing the hands of whoever is nearest to help hold the line. But that's not what's happening here in the United States. Too many MAGA Republicans are undermining the United States unity, with Marjorie Taylor Greene even calling for secession in the form of a national divorce. World War III threats, and can't Ukraine just give in for peace? This is probably some propaganda that you've heard. There's a big push for giving in to peace. So I kind of wanted to lay out for everyone, though I'm pretty sure anyone listening already knows that's probably not a workable solution, but I do think it's important that we look at people's arguments and see if there's any validity there. One of Russia's strongest talking points to get people to parrot their propaganda is that if Ukraine would just give in, there would be peace, and if they don't, there will be World War III. If that strikes you as fear-mongering and reminds anybody of, I'm not comparing George W. Bush to Putin, that would be ridiculous, but that same level of using threats to get people to comply, it's not something you hope to see, is certainly not in a democracy. But this idea has taken root, so on the far left and the not so far right, and it's repeated constantly on conservative media. Elon Musk repeats it on Twitter, which he owns now. The stakes have been raised by Russia with the START treaty suspension and threats to other countries. So I want to talk about how all of that looks and what is at stake right now. This conflict, which has given rise to the bloodiest war since World War II, started actually in 2014 when Russia annexed Crimea. Ukraine was a divided state, and Russia took advantage of this by arming separatists. That might also seem a little too close to home for comfort for some of us. who are paying attention to Russia's successful efforts to divide this country. Look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, just called for a national divorce. That's not at the same level of what happened in Ukraine, but the parallels are there of just how Putin goes about destabilizing a country that holds democracy as a value, which is, he's doing that in Ukraine, he is doing it here, he is doing it to the West. So Ukraine represents power to Russia, power and the image of being a superpower. Putin wants it back because Ukrainian President Zelensky is aligned with Western-style democracy, and that makes a very stark contrast to Putin's autocratic regime in Russia. And there are additional interests for Russia in terms of trade, energy, Putin's feelings that NATO's post-Cold War expansion is a humiliation. During one of the, let's see, sorry, I got to repeat myself again. This is from the Kyiv Post. During 1 year of the full-scale invasion, Russia launched almost 5,000 missiles and made almost 3,500 airstrikes against Ukraine. Russia also made almost 1,100 attacks using drones, the Ukrainian General Staff reported. That's from yesterday. So Russia is also threatening Germany. So for those of you who are maybe talking to friends or family who say, why can't Ukraine give in? Well, it's actually not just about Ukraine. Ukraine could give in, but then there are these other targets. And actually, Putin has been attacking the United States, although in a cyber war, in a war of propaganda, not a physical war. But he isn't about to stop. He has been pushing to gain power. He wants to be a superpower again. And that's what this is all about. So this is very troubling. And if anyone who, if you're sensitive to war issues, I'm just letting you know that this is going to get a little ugly for a moment here. And I'm not playing any video. That's all on the Substack. If you want to watch it, it's all on our Substack with the transcript of this podcast. But so Russia's threatening Germany, and during a rally held by Putin on Wednesday, Russians sang a song that they are defending the fatherland by raising the red flag over Berlin. The advisor to the Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine warned, "Attention, Germany, Russians sing about Russian flag over Berlin." Russia, the country that invaded the sovereign state of Ukraine, calls Ukrainians demons and claims that missiles are flying as a, quote, cure for sick Ukrainians. Meanwhile, Putin led another rally. This is the same rally. This is a different take on it, full of gruesome narratives. Listen to the words of their songs about their arms covered in blood up to their elbows and sending missiles to cure sick Ukrainians, whom they have also described as demons. Does that sound to anyone like someone that can be reasoned with? Because this narrative that Ukraine should give in to Russia implies that Ukraine has power over ending this war, and they don't. I mean, other than saying, yes, we will no longer be a democracy, we will fold to you completely, which would ruin what they've been building there. That's the only way that they could give in to Russia. And the people saying that, would they suggest that the United States give in to Hitler had that happened? Because that's, that's kind of, it's just such a weird thing. What does it mean to give in to a brutal autocrat who's committing war crimes against humanity? What does that mean for the future? Now, in China, there's also growing concerns about China's support for Russia's military. And in setting this global context for you about the threat to Western democracy. In Mexico, this is just an example of how the world is at war with encroaching authoritarianism. The president of Mexico's majority in Congress passed legal changes to gut Mexico's independent elections body in what most experts see as the country's most consequential democratic setback in recent decades. If that sounds a lot like what Ron DeSantis is doing in Florida based on the model set by Viktor Orban of Hungary, that's because it is. And see, this is all telling a very similar story. And caving into that doesn't work. And I don't want to minimize what Russia's doing by suggesting or making this comparison to a bully, but it is the same power dynamic. We all know that you don't give in to a bully. If they see that weakness, they're going to pounce for even more. And that's the problem with the narrative of peace can be had if Ukrainians just give in. So, I want to talk about how Republicans are bowing down to this global threat. The president of the United States is very busy upholding freedom, and naturally, it seems, MAGA Republicans are outraged by that. As Republicans war within their own party with one another about support for Ukraine, and more vocal members attack President Biden for his show of strength and support for Ukraine via his iconic visit, Florida Republican Representative Matt Gaetz introduced a bill to cease support, citing Ukraine fatigue, quote unquote. And if you Google this phrase, you'll find that they're running with it as hard as they can, with a former Rush Limbaugh replacement host using that phrase as the title to an opinion piece, claiming that Ukraine fatigue is building on the horizon. And a moment to talk about that. I do think people are concerned. It is going to be difficult to keep support for Ukraine because it's taking resources, and people see that as taking away from them. They don't see it as actually protecting themselves from this happening in their own country to them. But actually, that's what this is all about. President Biden is not, and our closest allies, they're not helping other countries who might have an equally legitimate cause for our support. And I think that opens up a whole nother can of worms that we don't have time to get into today. But the reason they're doing this in Ukraine is because this is basically about tilting power towards democracy. It's an attempt to stop the takeover by a dictator. And I'm not comparing, I don't want this to be seen as calling Putin Hitler, but I do want to make the comparison in terms of what is at stake because of the way that Hitler's invasion grew. And I think that's a thread that you can look at and kind of see what is at stake with this and why this is being treated so differently. So Speaker McCarthy's doing, that McCarthy dance, the one many have tried before him and failed, of not taking a public side. But even then, he still seems to make sure that it's known, to make it known that Republicans wouldn't rubber stamp any support for aid for Ukraine. McCarthy, who barely won his gavel after a record-setting 15 rounds of votes, hit Biden with an accusation that his actions are a bit too late, which is this is a weird accusation for Republicans to make, but it's very McCarthy-like because he really has yet to land a blow. I think it's maybe because he's trying to appease too many people, but his message basically is they don't support Ukraine funds, at least not they're not going to rubber stamp it, but they hate Biden's trip to Ukraine, but also Biden is late, not doing enough. So that's not a great message. You can see how that's just, it's not going to work for a party. When it comes time to, when 2024 rolls around, this is not the message that Republicans need. But much more important, it's not the message our country needs. Now, over in the Senate, the grown-up in the room happens to be the same senator who single-handedly stole a Supreme Court seat from President Obama, and thus can be held responsible for a lot of the resulting current loss of freedoms in this country, from abortion to states' rights to make gun laws. So, yeah, Republican Minority Leader Mitch McConnell tried to change the narrative from the weak isolationist voices in his party to his own pronouncement. Reports about the death of Republican support for strong American leadership in the world have been greatly exaggerated. Well, even Mitch McConnell can't bring Marjorie Taylor Greene to heel, to pretend to even support a Democratic president purely because it looks bad on the global stage to have Republicans not supporting freedom and American leadership. But that is indeed what they are doing. They are making it known on the global stage they don't support freedom and they don't support American leadership. And we know this because even Mitch McConnell is being defensive about it. Former Republican Representative Adam Kinzinger wrote of Greene's secession push, "In the old days, a politician would be kicked out for opposing the Union's survival." Yeah, how things have changed. And here is the Republican Party leader, Donald Trump, saying that he would end this war in a day. Quote, "Continuing to pour money in is delaying everything. It is delaying a lot of settlement. I could settle that in one day. That should be settled immediately." His strategy for ending the war is basically giving Putin everything he wants, Aaron Report wrote over this video of Trump from Monday. Trump went so far as to reaffirm his close relationship with Putin, reminding folks of that time that he trusted Putin when the Russian leader said he didn't interfere in the 2016 election. Yes, Trump believed him over the U.S. intelligence community. This is from another video that Rupar got. Trump brags that he, quote, actually had a very good relationship with Putin, and says that he was asked whether he trusted Putin more than the U.S. intelligence community. "It could be the toughest question I've ever been asked as a politician." I don't even know what to say about that. The toughest question he's ever been asked is whether or not he believed U.S. intelligence over Putin. I think that speaks for itself. Meanwhile, Russia is asking in their rally if they should provide graves for all of you, quote unquote. These are not good people. Putin is not a good person. This is not someone with whom anyone can negotiate. There's no one who can do that. And President Trump isn't going to try to negotiate with Putin or settle anything. What he's going to do is give in to Putin. That's what he means by settle. That's what all of these Republicans who are against supporting Ukraine want. That's what they, that's the end goal for all of the things that they're pushing. You stop aid to Ukraine, that's giving Ukraine to Putin. So President Biden, meanwhile, has this unique authority on this issue on the global stage. There's this stark contrast with the fractured Republican response to Ukraine and that of President Biden's. President Biden spoke to the anxious leaders of the Bucharest Nine, Bulgaria, the Czech Republic, Lithuania, Poland. There's the whole list is on the Substack, but they're called the B9. And he spoke with them on Wednesday while he was in Warsaw about their concerns pertaining to Putin's expansionist ambitions. And that comes back to that comparison that I was making to Hitler's approach. I am not calling Putin Hitler, but they both have this expansionist, they both have and had expansionist ambitions, bloody expansionist ambitions, ruthless expansionist ambitions. Biden reaffirmed the U.S.'s commitment to the security of the B9 and pointed out the fact that he himself, as a senator, pushed the hardest to expand NATO membership for many of the members sitting around the table. Here's a quote of what he said. And the irony is that one of the last conversations I had with our friend in Russia I said, you keep asking for the Finlandization of NATO, and you're going to get the NATOization of Finland. Well, it happened. Not only are we strong as we were, we're stronger. That's our president. I think that's something to be proud of. A president who's standing up against these horrific war crimes and against autocracy. Because again, war crimes happen all over the globe, and we are not intervening. So the difference is that here, what's at stake, and this seems a little Machiavellian, but what's at stake is freedom in the West. So a Ukrainian service member said of Biden's visit, told CNN, it's just something unbelievable that at a time like this, the President of the United States is coming to Kyiv. That's how important his visit was. So once again, President Biden's decades of experience mattered, and this should put an end to the ageist attacks on this president. It won't, but it should. And here the Republicans seem to have bought Putin's propaganda about Biden. It's not just the Russians who miscalculated President Biden's power and grasp of the nuances of global affairs. Republicans have been echoing the Russian propaganda that Biden is ill and weak. And now they all have egg on their faces. President Biden took this historic and unprecedented 24-hour secret trip starting at 4 a.m. on Sunday morning and involving 2 10-hour train trips, multiple planes and a motorcade, multiple meetings with leaders, and a major speech in Poland. Biden's visit to Ukraine, a year into the biggest war in Europe since World War II, underscores just how badly Russian President Vladimir Putin miscalculated. Putin didn't just misjudge Ukraine's determination to resist and its revulsion with his claims that Ukraine is not a real country. He may have just bought into the Kremlin's own malicious propaganda about the feebleness of American leadership, echoed and amplified by Biden's political foes. That was written by, that was a column in CNN written by their World Affairs columnist. And President Biden's visit to Ukraine did humiliate Russia. He visited a war zone that we had no control over. The United States did not have control over critical infrastructure, and we did not have troops on the ground. So that was unprecedented. And it humiliated Russia. A Russian journalist called his visit demonstrative humiliation of Russia. What is it now after all of this? What is the overarching theme? The theme is that it's time to come together. And at the risk of sounding kind of rah-rah hawkish, allow me to preface this with the fact that I was against the invasion of Iraq when it happened. War itself is hideous. It's hideous pain and loss, and it should never be undertaken lightly. But this is not a war of choice for the Ukrainians. They were invaded by a saber-rattling lunatic who threatens the most basic values the West holds dear. This is a war about freedom. There will never be peace without a show of strength to stop Putin. Some people can't be reasoned with, and he is one of them. Thankfully, President Biden is well aware of the realities surrounding Putin's motives for his war of aggression against Ukraine. For Putin, this is about revenge and an insatiable hunger for Russia to be restored to its former glory as a superpower. It should be easy for anyone in the United States to unite around this single issue of protecting freedom. It needn't require agreement on anything else. The Republican Party should be constructive and responsible in their criticism of President Biden. They should function as the loyal opposition. But we are not seeing that from the Republicans in a united sense right now. The loudest voices in the Republican Party, and they have been elevated to high positions in the House, and one of them is their party leader who is running for president again in 2024 and was their last president. So this cannot be dismissed as extremist outliers. These voices are rather loudly, proudly defining themselves as being against global freedom and all that the West stands for. Perhaps this is the natural progression of a party so enmeshed with Putin they can no longer even put on a face of patriotism and defenders of freedom. That's just horrifying. But no matter the motivation for this undermining and repugnant behavior, this is not a winning position for the Republican Party. It is also a repugnant position in the face of the crimes against humanity Russia is enacting on innocent Ukrainians. Putin is finding that it is harder to conquer the Ukrainians than it is or was to conquer the majority of the Republican Party in the United States. For those who recall that it became unpatriotic to even criticize President George W. Bush, the Dixie Chicks were indeed canceled for it after he invaded Iraq. The double standard here is glaring. But of course, we should always be free to criticize our president, war or no war. Even about the war, yes. The issue with the MAGA Republican criticism regarding Russia and Ukraine is that they are positioning themselves against freedom and democracy. It should be easy to stand for freedom and support a president's actions and leadership defending Western values. But this is too much of an ask for the MAGA branch of the GOP. Cutting down President Biden and even Western ideals has become their bread and butter. It seems they spend every hour of their waking days sniffing around for manufactured outrage they can blow up with histrionics and hysteria. In the end, what it looks like is Republicans look weak and impotent as they side with a brutal dictator with whom we are effectively at war. This has been Sarah Jones on the Politicus Pod for Politicus USA's The Daily. If you're tired of billionaires controlling the news you see and you want to support independent news like us that puts the people first, please subscribe to our Substack. And we would love to get your comments on the articles and the podcast. Let us know, give us your feedback, let us know what you're thinking about these issues. Thank you so much, and I look forward to talking with you next time.